Anybody who saw the spectacle last Friday, of that convicted criminal, the President of the United States, and his boot-licking, ass-licking sidekick, Vance. Anyone who saw the spectacle of them humiliating the leader, the democratically elected leader of Ukraine, who is not concerned about the rule of law being torn up, is incredibly naive in my view. There's no question that the world is a dangerous place now, because it seems to be the case that a dictator, an autocrat, a former KGB agent like Putin can simply invade another country and not be called to account, not be confirmed and considered as the aggressor, and get a free ride from the man-child that is the President of the United States. The most humiliating aspect of the press conference, the setup, in my view, is the fact that you have a man who was convicted on 34 felony counts, lecturing a man who is the elected representative of a country that has been invaded, and who has fought valiantly and bravely and led his people very, very bravely over the last 3 years since Putin invaded Ukraine. It was really a breathtaking, stomach-churning sight to see a guy who was found to have sexually assaulted E. Jean Carroll, who lies with equanimity and who is a convicted felon, lecturing and berating a person like Zelensky, who's relying on the rule of law and who's relying on being the elected representative of his people, and who's relying on some fundamental aspects of the rule of law. For example, sovereignty, the protection of sovereignty of a nation. In other words, Ukraine is entitled to exist, not be wiped off the map. So that is a fundamental right of international law. The second one is territorial integrity. Zelensky, like any leader of any country, is entitled to fight for and protect the territorial integrity of their borders and of their land mass, as it were. And yet you have this man-child, this lumpen oaf, this moron, this grifter, this charlatan, lecturing Zelensky about not having cards, or what he should or what he shouldn't do. It's an absolutely appalling spectacle. And my bigger fear, though, is not just for Ukraine, it's for the rule of law generally and the rule of law internationally. And let me put a question to you. If Putin can invade Ukraine and get away with it, and if the pressure is put on the likes of Zelensky to do a deal or call a ceasefire or do a deal for minerals with America, if that can happen and Putin essentially gets his way, what's to stop Putin from invading Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland? In fact, what's to stop Putin from invading Ireland? Now, you might think that it's a very far-fetched idea to suggest that Russia might invade Ireland. But there's a fundamental principle involved in Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And the fundamental principle is this: if he is entitled, as Trump and Vance seem to think, to invade a foreign country, and the foreign country must roll over and make peace and do a deal with America for minerals, what's to stop, from a legal perspective, Putin invading any other country? And why wouldn't Ireland be of interest, given its strategic location close to America, or being the closest point in Europe to America? You might think this is an incredibly fanciful idea, but there is a principle involved, and the principle has to do with territorial integrity, sovereignty, the right of a nation, the right of a state to exist and continue existing. And that is up in the air at the moment, quite frankly, because it was clear from the humiliating meeting the other day in the White House that Trump is perfectly willing to throw Zelensky to the wolves, to stop supporting or providing any security to Ukraine, and to let Putin fall to it, do what he likes. That's the only conclusion you could draw. But my bigger fear is not just to do with Ukraine, it's to do with the upsetting, the overturning of internationally protected norms, internationally recognised norms to do with and associated with the rule of law. Norms like, as I say, sovereignty, territorial integrity and so on. And if they're thrown out the window by Trump for the sake of a deal or anything else, but God help us all. Don't forget too that before J.D. Vance was put forward as the vice presidential nominee, Trump's pick, he described Trump as cultural heroin. He described Trump as Hitler. And now there he is, kissing Trump's arse, kissing Trump's considerable arse, and doing his bidding. And yet this is the guy who described Trump as Hitler and cultural heroin, and completely without morals and so on and so forth. It's a frightening time, there's no doubt about it. It's a frightening time. And people here think, oh, Trump is great, or J.D. Vance is great, or they'd put Irish politicians, in their place and so on and so forth. Little do they know what the rule of law actually means, and the protections that the rule of law gives a person, gives a citizen. And no matter how bad you might think your politicians are, or anybody else is for that matter, the protection of the rule of law is something to be cherished and is something to hold on to, because the alternatives are appalling. The alternative to the rule of law is anarchy. The alternative to the rule of law is the strongest person or body wins and basically subjugates everybody else, pounds everybody else into submission. The rule of law is important, and people don't realise it won't realise it really until it's done away with. And in America at the moment, it seems to be the case that the rule of law is being significantly and seriously threatened. And I mean, J.D. Vance was sending out a tweet there last week, or Elon Musk, I think it was, about the judges. If the judges don't row in and do Trump's bidding, well then they can be impeached, in other words fired. It's an appalling scenario, an appalling vista, and if people only gave it some thought and forecast or anticipated where it can lead, I don't think they'd be nearly as supportive of Trump and Vance and what they are doing essentially. But I mean, throwing Ukraine
and Ukrainian people to the wolves, essentially. It is an absolutely appalling scenario, and the rule of law must prevail. Things like decency and integrity and territorial integrity and sovereignty and the right of people to determine their own fate and so on once they elect a leader and so forth. These things are vitally important. Anyway, that's my take on that absolutely stomach-churning spectacle last week that we saw in the White House, and you would really have to wonder, what does Putin have on Trump? Because you really do have to come to a conclusion at some point that there must be something in it. There must be something behind this headlong rush by the Americans to change in a 180-degree about-turn change policy and embrace the Russians, embrace Putin. It's absolutely mind-boggling. Anyway, hope you liked the video. If you do, hit the thumbs up button down below. I'm sure you have comments. If you do, leave them down below. Thanks a lot.